Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm Rowena Itchon, Senior Vice President. We've assembled our former speechwriters to discuss President Biden's inaugural address. So with me is Lance Izumi, speechwriter to former Attorney General Edwin Meese, and as you know, Senior Director of PRI's Education Studies Program. We also have Tim Anaya, speechwriter to former Governor Schwarzenegger and other lawmakers in the California legislature. Tim is also Senior Director of Communications at PRI. And I was a speechwriter to former Governor Pete Wilson, and I was a research assistant in President Reagan's speechwriting staff. So let's go around the virtual table here and get everyone's overall impressions. I'll start off. I was at the inauguration in 2017, and what struck me is the silence of this event. You know, in normal inaugurations, there's a huge crowd. You could hear the roar of applause. You know, the government and most businesses are officially closed on inauguration day. So DC is really one big party town. So the lack of crowds, very few people, even in the official audience, I think gave a kind of solemnity to the event that I haven't really seen before. And given the pandemic and past events, I think it was actually fitting. I thought the speech was actually quite good, very eloquent and well crafted. But we'll talk about more of that a little later. What did you think, Lance?
Well, I think that it was a well-crafted speech. The thing that jumped out at me, though, was that, I'm not saying that, Joe Biden necessarily didn't believe what he was saying, but I will say this, the effect of it was probably to be the most disingenuous speech I have ever heard in my life. Because on the one hand, and we'll be talking about issues involving unity and other topics, but I think that there was this huge disconnect between the rhetoric that was in Joe Biden's speech and the reality that's taking place out there in Washington and across America. And so, if you were in a vacuum and didn't know anything about what was going on in America, and you simply heard this speech, you would think that, hey, this is A, a great speech, and B, it sounds a lot of themes that, you hope will come true. But if you are a real person living in America in January in 2021, and you see what's taking place all across this country, and you try and square that with what Joe Biden is saying in his speech, there's very little connection between those two things. And so, to me, Joe Biden can say all the sugar and marmalade he wants in his speech, but until he makes that connection between that rhetoric and trying to actually ensure that that rhetoric becomes a reality and basically talks not so much to Trump's people, but to his own supporters, then I think that the themes that he espoused in his speech are going to, just continue to be rhetoric, and we'll see a very different reality going forward.
How about you, Tim? What were your overall impressions?
Well, I shared the same impression that you had, Ro, about having this great inaugural without a big crowd present. I had the opportunity to attend President Bush's second inauguration in 2005. And for anyone who has been to an inauguration in person, you will agree there is no substitute for seeing it in person. Yeah, it's great to watch it on TV, but it's so exciting to see it in person. And you're there with, we made friends with people from all across the country, during the ceremony. We made sure to get there early, so we had standing tickets, but we were right in the front of the standing section. So we got, in fact, in my office, I have framed my yellow ticket from the inaugural. I was kind of sad for all the many supporters of President Biden who didn't have the opportunity to have their moment and see it in person today. But without a crowd, I thought they did a very good job organizing it in these unusual times. You couldn't help but be inspired by seeing all the 200,000 flags beautifully displayed on the mall, representing, the Americans and people from around the world who couldn't be there to watch it in person. Now we'll get into the speech later, but I thought overall, whoever you supported in the election, there's no doubt that we're coming out of a pretty rocky 4-year period. And I think in his speech today and the tone that he said and the words that he used, President Biden was signaling that things are going to be different in his administration. And that starts with, kind of a lowering of the political temperature. So overall, I thought it was a very effective way to start a new chapter and chart America on a very different course in a way that, will be hopeful and unifying. Now, the challenge will be whether the rhetoric will match the results. Can he accomplish his policy goals while remaining true to that spirit that he put forward today?
So let's move on to the speech itself, beginning with delivery and style. And I haven't really heard Biden all that many times give a speech, only because, as we all know, he didn't campaign very much. He was in his house. So you don't really get to know Biden as a speech giver. And so I tried to watch as many of his speeches as I possibly could over the last few weeks when he's actually been out in the open. And my overall impression of the way he delivers a speech is really one word. He sounds like a scold. And I was hoping that in his inaugural address, he would kind of rise above being a scold and a lecturer, but he still had that kind of grimacing face manner, which I think marred a pretty good speech. And frankly, I'm sad to say that I don't know if he can really help himself. He might just have that kind of style. But the irony is that, you hear from the Washington insiders and people who know him that he's actually a very nice man. We've all seen him in the campaign trail where he's actually insulted members of the audience who actually asked him tough questions. So the scolding, lecturing manner of his is something that I think he really, really has to work on. And, what's going to happen when he actually has to give a ceremonial speech. So I think he's really got to work on that, bring some joie de vivre and some humor to giving speeches. People don't like to be scolded at or lectured at, and it's a turnoff. And as we all know, as we're speechwriters, we humbly understand that style is really what moves an audience. What do you think, Lance?
Well, this may be the one time that I am much more generous to Joe Biden than anybody else on this panel. I'm actually felt a little bit the opposite, Ro. I actually thought that, Joe delivered the speech very well. And as I said in my opening statement, I mean, I don't know whether he really sincerely believes what he said or not, but it seemed like he did. And so when he said things like, we can treat each other with dignity and respect, I thought he delivered those types of lines very well. And again, it's a question of whether that rhetoric will match the reality afterwards. But my feeling was that his delivery in this speech was, I thought about the right tone, and that you felt, again, if you didn't know anything else that was going on in America, that he was sincere in what he was saying, and that you might believe that a new chapter would be turned for the better here in America, and that he was interested in unifying the country. We'll get into the specifics about that theme, but in terms of him delivering that message, I mean, I thought he delivered it, quite well, and that, I felt that he did a good job in trying to lay out those themes for the American people.
Well, that's very interesting, Lance. Maybe Tim's going to take the middle ground. But I'm happy to hear that other people, especially you, Lance, had a better impression of his delivery, and maybe it's just me. What do you think, Tim?
Well, I noticed, like you did, Ro, that he was squinting quite a bit, even during the taking of the oath of office. And that's a thing that, folks at home may not be thinking about. We think about it, when you're doing a photo shoot or a press conference at the Capitol or somewhere like that, that you got to think of the time of day and where the sun is. So I'm sure the sun was shining right in his eyes during that time. And I bet he wished he was wearing his cherished aviator glasses during the oath and his speech. I agree with you both, but I thought of his style and delivery through a different lens. I think it's quite commonly known that President Biden overcame a terrible stutter as a child. And even today, he puts a lot of time and energy into preparing to deliver his speeches, especially a major one like the inaugural address. That's a historic speech. When I was preparing this morning, I heard on television that he was preparing for his speech right up to the last minute. And apparently, he makes certain marks on the prepared text of his speeches so he knows the proper words to emphasize for delivery. And apparently that's a technique that people commonly use to overcome a stutter. That's also, an important speech writing technique that you underline or bold or capitalize certain words for emphasis. Yes, he had moments when he was kind of shouting. Yes, he had moments when he was squinting. Yes, he had moments where he tripped up a little bit. But I think if you think about the speech through that lens, what a feat that you can deliver so powerful a speech before the eyes of the nation and the world.
So let's move on to the unity theme of his speech, and was he successful in delivering that theme? I thought the unity theme was a good one. And Lance, I looked at it more as aspirational rather than characterizing the current rancor in Washington and the politics of our country. So I thought it was fitting to use this unity theme, but I think it could backfire on him if he rams through his agenda without attempting any kind of compromise. If he uses mean rhetoric to put down the opposition, and we know that he's quite capable of saying nasty things, when confronted or in uncomfortable situations. So every time when he puts down dissenting voices or his party puts down dissenting voices, the opposition is going to dredge up this unity theme and call him out on it. And so it's a big risk to highlight this unity theme. And of course, he's also got problems in his own party. It's going to be a tough idea to implement, especially with the far left lawmakers who are far more energetic and actually much more charismatic and who want to take over his agenda. So I thought it was an important theme. I thought it was a good theme, but it's going to be hard to deliver any policy proposal or one remark. People are going to call him out on it. And I'm one of those people. What about you, Lance?
Again, the things he said about unity were good in the sense that, if you just looked at the words on paper and the words that came out of his mouth, they were, for the most part, sentiments that I think all Americans could agree with. But on the other hand, you have to put it in context. And, like, for example, right out of the gate, he started talking about democracy, and that the will of the people has been heeded on this day and democracy has prevailed. Well, for, let's say, a Trump supporter who believes that there was fraud and corruption in this election, they don't believe that. They don't believe that the will of the people has truly been heeded and that democracy has prevailed. And so if you're, saying that and emphasizing that right out of the gate, it's almost like rubbing the nose of a lot of Trump supporters in the dirt, and then afterwards telling them to let's now be unified, because I could hear anyway after that first few paragraphs of his speech, that for those Trump supporters who were listening to the speech or watching the speech, a lot of screams in a lot of living rooms. And also too, I think that when you hear him talk, for example, about, he had some good lines, he said, let's begin to listen to one another again. Well, yes, that's true. We should listen to one another again. But how does he square that with his friends in big tech and other places that are right now stifling the ability of conservatives to speak their mind on various social media platforms? They're being canceled, they're being banned, they're being deplatformed. And so how does that theme, square with what's going on amongst his supporters who are undercutting people who did not support him and who are therefore whose voices are being squelched? So when he says things like, "Just for a moment, let's stand in the other person's shoes," I don't know that he can feel that. I mean, truly, if he wanted to stand into somebody else's shoes, he should tell some of his biggest supporters to make sure that there's a robust, open, and full debate in America, and that when he if he's okay with people disagreeing with him, fine, but let that debate take place in the widest possible forum as possible here in America. And so I think that the reality has to match the rhetoric. And so far, I don't see that reality coming anywhere close to matching his rhetoric.
Tim?
Well, I think that Americans needed a moment of national unity, especially when you think about all we've gone through just in the past couple of weeks. So I thought the president's call for unity was important and especially necessary, when he was delivering a speech in a Washington, D.C. that'd become an armed camp. I loved his adaptation of the Lincoln quote when he said, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Yes, we're going to disagree. And that's the heart of our democracy, that we're going to disagree. But we disagree agreeably and with respect, not with the type of armed insurrection that we saw just a few weeks ago on the very spot where the president was taking the oath of office. So I thought the president delivered the perfect words and tone to demonstrate that we have someone who's going to chart a dramatically different course. Now, I disagree with Lance. I don't see a Joe Biden as putting his thumb in the eyes of his opponents. He said things about, I want to hear you out, you hear me out. Yes, they may disagree strongly with his policy agenda, but I didn't take away today someone who's gonna rub everything, in their eyes. And this was a great line that I thought he said that really summed that up. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic, it's perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly, disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I think that's something that all of us, wherever we stand on the political spectrum, should take to heart as we approach the debates over the next 4 years.
Well, we talked about some of the best lines of his speech now. So let's go into that a little bit more. I've got a couple of favorites. My one favorite is, quote, politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. That stuck to me because I've spent many years in Washington, almost half my career, and also in Sacramento. And I've also worked in corporate America. I've never seen politics so all-consuming, coloring everything and affecting relationships among friends, coworkers, even families. So I'm glad that President Biden reminded the country that everyone should put politics into perspective. In my days in DC during the Reagan and Clinton years, even the Bush era, it's hard to believe it now, but Republicans and Democrats were actually friends and went to each other's parties and even got married, for Biden to put that in perspective and remind people that it doesn't all have to be a cause for total war, as he says. My other favorite line was his reference to St. Augustine. And he says, quoting St. Augustine, a saint in my church wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and truth. And I was surprised by that line because we're increasingly a secular society. And I was amazed that he actually quoted a Catholic saint, a doctor of the church. So maybe Biden is a little bit old school that way. He's not afraid to refer to a church saint, an old white guy, which probably provided a cringe moment to many in the left. For my worst lines, here's one, quote, we can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make healthcare secure for all. We can deliver racial justice. My question is, who is that we? I have a hunch that the we meant government. And it's so obvious. Government cannot do these things. And that's of our viewpoint as conservatives and free marketeers. I mean, if he means we, who brought the vaccine to this country? It was a private sector and brilliant scientists. Who can finally put this virus to bed? It's the American people who do the right things, wear masks, social distance. The government can't bring someone into the middle class. It's got to come from individual initiative. Government can help you when you're unemployed with a little bit of income, but it can't raise you into the middle classes. That's got to come from you. And I think he's doing a disservice to Americans in telling them that the government can do it. Finally, he said a couple of buzzwords that kind of bothered me. He used, of course, systemic racism, the climate crisis. I think these are now part of the left's lexicon these days, and he probably had to check those boxes and insert them somewhere in the speech, and that he did. What do you think, Lance?
Well, I think that the best line that he quoted, I think the St. Augustine line was a good one. I actually liked when he quoted towards the end of his speech the American anthem, this poem where it has a line in there that says, "Let me know in my heart when my days are through, America, America, I gave my best to you." And I think that's a very good, nice, simple message that everybody in America can support. Well, most everybody, one hopes, except maybe the America-hating left, many of whom voted for him. But I think that that's a good unifying line. And so, it I think supported and added to his theme of unity in his speech. For the worst moment, it's interesting, Ro, that the worst line that I thought he gave was exactly the line that you thought was his best line. The politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. That's exactly what we had in America in the summer. And did Joe Biden raise his voice at all to stop that? He wouldn't even recognize that that's what was going on. He didn't recognize the forces that were causing that raging fire. He didn't do anything to call off the dogs of the left that were burning down cities across America. It was a raging fire. And when he says that every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war, well, it looked like a total war to me in those cities from Portland to New York to Seattle, many other cities. And so I didn't see Joe Biden doing anything to stop that total war from occurring. And he had the opportunity. So when he had his chance to actually turn his feelings or his rhetoric into action, he did nothing. And I feel that made that line the worst moment, the worst part of his speech for me.
How about you, Tim?
Well, I agree with you, Ro, on and disagree with Lance on that kind of section of the speech. When he said every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. Hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. It reminded me of how I've always approached politics and how I approached working with my friends on both sides of the aisle when I worked in the legislature. And you've seen that disappear in recent years as our politics has gotten uglier and more divisive. And I think we'd all be better served if we kind of went back to, those are the good old days when you can disagree about politics during the day, but be friends at night. The old Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill looking at their watches, is it 6 o'clock yet, so we can be friends? I think we'd all be better served if we went back to those days. The other part that I thought that I really appreciated was how real the president was at times, especially when talking about the problems that we're facing as Americans today. And it wasn't a downer. It wasn't a Jimmy Carter crisis of confidence lecture. He was basically leveling with the American people about the reality we face today. And I think that was important for the American people to see the president be real right away. When he said, "We have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities, much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now." I would say to that, that might be an understatement. to the times that we face. So I think that was good to see. Yes, we're optimistic that a unified American people can overcome these challenges, but we're not going to underscore the severity of the challenges that are facing us and the numerous challenges all at once. So I appreciated that kind of realism and honesty. As for the worst lines, I'm always a little concerned, and my ears perk up a little bit when I hear this discussion of rooting out truth and lies. Yes, it's important that everyone, when conspiracy theories are being spread about, what happened in the past election, it is important to stand up and give the facts and share the hard truth to people who may not want to hear it, people who are passionate supporters, President Trump, that there were not millions of fraudulent votes cast. President Biden was legitimately elected president. That's one thing. What I fear, and where I fear we're going in the name of rooting out this quote unquote disinformation, is that legitimate political discourse is going to be targeted, especially from those who may have unpopular, though legitimate and deeply principled beliefs. We see this a lot in the debate over climate change. We're at a time where you see leaders like Gavin Newsom and others try to end the debate over climate change related public policies by just dismissing them as not even being legitimate or being discussed. And I think that's very dangerous for a democracy. So yes, we need to embrace fact, and yes, we need to reject conspiracy theories, but we also need to protect the rights of the minority to put forward and debate their ideas and treat their ideas with respect, just as we do the more popular policy ideas. And that extends in Congress, that extends on social media, everywhere in our political discourse. So I'm always a little sensitive and concerned when we hear that kind of language, that it's going to be used as an excuse to legitimize groupthink and root out legitimate political ideas and philosophies that may be held by a minority of Americans.
All right, let's move on to best moment. So my favorite moment through the whole inaugural event was Lady Gaga. I thought she made history. She had the most beautiful rendition of the anthem I've heard in a long, long time. And of course, she had that crazy over-the-top dress. So I'll remember that her rendition and that dress for many, many years to come. The worst moment, the worst moment actually never happened. I was watching the pre-inaugural show and saw various dignitaries filing in. And I looked at, of course, I'm female, so I looked at all of the outfits all of the women were wearing. And I noticed that Kamala Harris's shoes, she was practically on stilts. Her shoes were on very, very high. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hope she doesn't trip. And sure enough, she just tripped a little bit down the stairs, but saved herself. It was on camera, but at least it wasn't part of the main event. So I'm glad it didn't happen. Otherwise, it would have been the worst moment. What do you think, Lance?
Well, I think the best moment, is not so much a moment that, I go back to the fact that I do think that President Biden delivered his speech very well. Certainly on stylistic points, I think that, he gave a very good speech. And so, I give him kudos for that. People who think that, Biden would, he's senile, he's losing it, or things like that. Well, if you watch that speech, he certainly didn't show any indication of that. And so I thought that was the best moment for in his speech. I didn't really see that there was a worse moment, except for the lines that and the reality that I think is very different from what he was talking about in his rhetoric. So I think that the inauguration, went off very well. And, so I certainly give kudos to those who planned it, and that everything went very smoothly.
Tim?
Well, I wondered, Rowan, I wonder if you had an observation on this too. Do you think they gave Lady Gaga 2 seats to fit her in that giant dress?
I know. Well, I didn't actually see her sit down. See, so she might have, I don't know, exited the stage, or I'm not sure. But that was quite the voluminous skirt. But you guys don't know this, but big is in. Big outfits and big skirts are in the last season or two.
Boy, there are so many steps. It's amazing that men and women don't trip down. And apparently, those steps when you're going down to the platform are quite steep. So, hats off to her for being able to go up and down all those steps in tall, high heels. I feel like I would have tripped and fallen about half a dozen times if it were me. For my best moment, I would say it was seeing the hero of the Capitol insurrection, Officer Eugene Goodman, the man who saved the Senate and prevented what could have been a mass assassination at the Capitol, escorting Vice President Harris to the inaugural platform. Apparently, he was appointed as an honorary sergeant at arms for the day's ceremony. It was good to see an American hero being given a fitting honor like that. Apparently, he's also soon going to be given the Congressional Gold Medal, and it's a well-deserved honor for his heroism. For my worst moment, and I know the people of Twitter strongly disagree with me, the poetry girl. I'm sorry. It's wonderful, great, at her age that she can do that. Poetry slams just don't do it for me.
I didn't get that far, Tim. I had already moved on. So let's wrap this up by just talking a little bit about what lies ahead in the next few weeks and months. I'd like to say that I disagree with the pundits that it's going to be tough to get legislation through a divided Congress. I have a lot of faith in Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer able to corral the Democrats. I think they can do a lot of damage. They're both masterful politicians, and I think that they will maneuver a very left agenda through Congress. And I think that they're going to be a lot more successful than people realize. I would like to say that here in California, a lot of Biden's plans, we've been there, done that. And so we've been fighting, this battle for many, many years now, and now we're going to extend it to the nation. And so I think we've got the tools, and we know how to argue, and we've actually had some victories in the past year. So I'm looking forward to doing our thing at PRI, which is provide good policy ideas. How about you, Lance?
Well, Ro, I think that regardless of what goes on in Congress, I think the thing to watch for, and it's more difficult than seeing what's going on in Congress, but it's trying to keep track of what's going on amongst the appointees within the administration. Regardless of what President Biden said in his in his inaugural address, when the rubber meets the road with this administration, it'll be what all of those hundreds of significant political appointees will be doing in their agencies and departments. And so I think that that's where the real harder left agenda is going to be played out. And I know like in the area that I worry about, education, how do issues of school choice, what's going to happen in the U.S. Department of Education now that you have a new team over there that is decidedly more skeptical about school choice than the outgoing administration? What's going to go on in terms of, let's say, critical race theory in the curriculum, those sorts of things. I mean, there are a lot of different issues that are going to be percolating in the federal bureaucracy, mainly out of sight of the public. And so that's where PRI, you, me, and Tim are going to have to be doing our job as the hawks to make sure that people understand what's going on back there in the bowels of the bureaucracy.
You get the last word, Tim.
Well, I thought that was well put, Lance. And, I think the president's speech, hopefully, and again, I agree with Lance on this too, will the rhetoric match the reality of, how the administration is going to roll out their agenda and try to pass things? It seems, though, that we're kind of turning the page toward a little more political normalcy. 4 years of kind of policy debates and disagreements there. The president asked for Americans to hear him out and hear one another and show respect to one another, and hopefully that will happen. That doesn't mean necessarily that Democrats and Republicans are going to agree or that we're in for a moderate administration. In fact, I think far from that. The president talked about the many challenges facing Americans today, and then he said, it's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And I think some of that is the pent-up energy of someone who's wanted to be a president since the 1970s and now has finally been given the keys to that elusive car he's always wanted to buy. And I think he's ready. I think he's ready to take it for more than a spin. I think the close margins that we have in Congress today means that, yes, there'll be a lot of executive orders. We've seen that today, and the administration has charted the executive order path they're going to take over the next week or so. We already know that the administration has rolled out a $1.9 trillion stimulus plan, and there's talk of a kind of a jobs and infrastructure plan that's going to come sometime next month. So the president's going to want to work with Congress on these items, and will want to work across the aisle. Whether that's accomplished or not is another matter, but I believe he's sincere in his effort to want to try. I think, as Congress has shown over the years, I think it'll be a lot easier to pass these big spending items than you might imagine, because there's nothing members of Congress love more than cutting a ribbon in their district and presenting a giant oversized check to some important constituency.
Thanks, Lance, and thanks, Tim, and thanks to all of our listeners, and we'll see you back next week for next round. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.